Z-Files back out on the road. This time we're in the office of Okaloosa County Supervisor of Elections, Paul LUX, and people say, oh, the election's all over. We're done with all of that stuff. But no, we're not. We've got elections this year.
Well, that's right. We always have universal municipal election days in March. So this March, it will be City of Crestview, City of Fort Walton Beach, City of Laurel Hill, Town of Shalimar, Town of Cinco Bayou. So those 5 municipalities coming up this March.
Right, and of course I know that in Crestview you have the city clerk and 3 council members. For Walton Beach, the mayor's position, and I think they do theirs where everybody can run and the top so many get elected. Isn't that what theirs is?
Well, and this is the first year we've done it this way for them. Okay. They changed their charter 2 years ago to begin electing their council members in a group like that. So there's no more seat numbers. It used to be in the City of Fort Walton elections, because you could live anywhere in the city and run for any seat. It kind of led to a jockeying for people picking who they wanted to run against. Gotcha. This forces them all to run in one big lump.
I think some of our other towns or cities do that also, where it's so many out of the group you actually get elected, the top 2 or top 3, depending on how many slots are open.
Well, in fact, it's basically all of them now except Crestview.
Right, Crestview.
So Laurel Hill does it that way, always has. Cinco Bayou, Shalimar, everybody else elects them as part of a larger group. Crestview, we still have the 3 precinct-specific seats, which are the ones that are up this time. You must live in a specific geographic area to run for these seats, although everyone in the city gets to vote on them. In order to hold that seat, you have to be physically living in that area.
Right. And in the Crestview's 3 precincts, one precinct is everything north of 90 that's inside the city limits, and then the other 2 are divided with everything that is south of 90 and either east or west of 85. So probably the precinct that is on the southwest corner of the city, because that takes in everything down off of P.J. Adams and all of that, may be the largest in population, and I'm going to bet you the north one and then the east would be number 3 in number of probably registered voters and or citizens who could be eligible to vote.
Yeah, and we don't actually track it that way. So, I mean, in our voter registration database, we don't use, I mean, we know where the geographic boundaries are, obviously. We know when candidates come to qualify that they're qualified to run for those seats based on their residency in those areas. But I can't, like, run a list for you out of our, I mean, we could obviously look at precinct numbers and what precincts are in there and add up the numbers from the city and do it the hard way, but I can't like give you a quick snapshot of it out of the computer system because we really don't track it that way.
Are there any voting precincts that are county voting precincts that would cross over one of those 3, either the Highway 90 or the Highway 85 boundary lines?
I don't think we have any precincts that cross the boundary lines. Okay. There may be precinct 9 when you get out toward because you know, like the golf course, which is the polling place for Precinct 45, is actually in Precinct 9, and Precinct 9's polling place is the old, well, it used to be the old Ag Building, is now New Beginnings Church out there on Highway 90. So, so Precinct 9 probably crosses Highway 90 a little bit. So like I said, it's something we could calculate, you know, the hard way, but it's nothing we have a quick number on.
Well, the thing we want to first point out right now is the candidates have been pre-qualifying for many of the city elections, but the official qualifying, now by pre-qualifying, I mean they can get a lot of the paperwork out of the way, but then they still have to officially qualify. Now, does that date, starts on Monday, the 3rd of January at 8 o'clock?
Well, it starts on Monday, the 2nd of January, but we're closed because it's a federal holiday. But the law doesn't give us any leeway to extend those hours in any way, shape, or form. So we have to say that qualifying is the week of January 2nd through January 6th from noon until noon, that Monday through Friday. But since our office isn't going to open until Tuesday at 8 a.m., that's really the first time that people can come in during qualifying week. And of course, the law gives everybody the opportunity to drop qualifying paperwork off in its entirety up to 2 weeks before. So that was actually last Monday. So we have had quite a number of people who have actually finished the qualifying process already, but we don't report them as qualified until the first day of qualifying.
So then Wednesday, January 6th will be the cutoff. I mean, Friday, January 6th, and then you'll know who the final candidates are for each of these offices, whether it's Crestview or any of the other towns. And then Election Day is in March, so when is that?
Election Day is March 14th, second Tuesday in March. So it'll be, and again, every precinct in Crestview, in the Crestview area, is divided between city and county. So just because you live in Precinct 9 does not mean you are going to be eligible for the election, because Precinct 9 is divided between city and county. Likewise, all of our Crestview precincts, for the most part, except for the one up off Airport Road, which is not in the city at all. So depending on where you live, if you're not sure if you're eligible, I would encourage you to just call our office or use the precinct lookup tool on our website. It'll tell you, or I'm sorry, the voter lookup tool on our website, and it'll tell you if you have an upcoming election that you're eligible for when you put in your information.
Right. And if you have moved to Okaloosa County in the last year or two, and if you weren't registered before the November election, you want to double check, well, you can again do that to find out if you, or to get registered. Now, what is the deadline to register for the March election? I guess it's going to be sometime in February?
Yep, February 13th, close of business, so 5 p.m. on February 13th. Get to one of our offices, get your form dropped off at the library. That's any of the, or, you know, obviously with NVRA, when you're getting your driver's license or updating a driver's license, you can always register to vote right across the hall, but, you know, we're kind of right here. So if you're going to be across the hall, you can just come see us.
Okay. Then the next thing we want to talk about is we had a news release from your office here a while back of something you've been involved with in a committee that's looking at the voting for the military. I know that this office in the supervisor elections in Florida was one of the early leaders because of so much military population here. Tell us a little bit about what that is and what that's all about.
Well, so I work on quite a number of committees on the national level, and this one is through a grant-funded program with the Council of State Governments, which is a nonprofit organization that is always looking for ways to help governments improve themselves. And they're a national body that get together with representatives of all of the various legislatures for the 50 states and talk about policy initiatives and things that they should be focusing on. And so the Federal Voting Assistance Program, which is actually a branch of the Department of Defense, whose job is to make sure absent military and overseas citizens have an opportunity to register and vote in their home jurisdictions. Through a grant program, we're helping them do research on a couple of different initiatives this year. The one that the press release was about was they had a policy working group and a technology working group, and the supervisor from Escambia County, Dave Stafford, he was involved in the policy side. I was involved in the technology side. So for us, it was about finding better ways to duplicate ballots. And when I say that, sometimes people go, wait a minute, what are you guys duplicating ballots for? There's a bunch of, but that was the subgroup of the technology group that I was working on. And mainly what it comes down to is because overseas voters are eligible to fax ballots back to us, because I can email blank ballots to absent military anywhere in the world, and they can print them out and send them back. Florida law requires that all of those ballots be put onto a machine-readable card and actually run through a tabulator. And so there's a process that we do in the canvassing board in a public meeting where those votes are transferred from the card that my machines can't read to cards that my machines can read, along with a verification process and you know, being able to go back and marry up the original with the duplicate ballot. So we're never counting anybody's votes twice, but we're taking unreadable votes from other media formats that they're eligible to return ballots by and transferring them to actual ballots so that we can count them with the tabulators. And my working group worked with there's several vendors nationwide who have software programs that will do this, some of which might be great but not affordable for a jurisdiction our size, and others you go to Orange County, California, or San Diego County, California, where we get 28,000 absentee ballots, and gosh, that's a lot for us. But I mean, the Miamis of the world and those large military installations like San Diego, where they have hundreds of thousands of absentee ballots that they have to deal with every election. So so some of that technology much better suited for larger jurisdictions, but what we explored were what all of the options were. Some of the other things our technology group did was also explored using military common access cards, or the CAC cards as they call them, those new ID cards for the military, as a means of verifying a voter's identity, not only for registration but also for voting purposes, and what some of those applications might be. So it may eventually lead us to finding a better way for them to return ballots to us electronically, but still in a secure manner.
I know in watching what you do in the canvassing room, you really have to start almost a week or more before an election like the November one, because the ballot comes in an envelope, so you obviously know who it came from. But once you have certified that signature of that person and they're eligible to vote, then the ballot itself is in another place, another envelope, I guess.
Yep.
Now, if it's faxed in, it just came in on a secured fax machine.
Right.
But then that's separated, so when you actually go to put that on the machine readable, nobody knows really whose piece of paper that was.
That's correct. So anyone who faxes a ballot back to us has to sign a waiver that says they're waiving their right to a secret ballot. That doesn't mean we publish a big list of here's everybody and how they voted, but what it does mean is one of my staff has to take that ballot off the fax machine. We have to look at the certificate and make sure that it's the right ballot style with the right voter and put it in the envelope to present it to the canvassing board. So somebody is going to see that voter's ballot. So by law, they have to waive the right to a secret ballot, but we still do absolutely everything we can to maintain the secrecy of those ballots.
Now, so you're looking at the technology for the overseas, the military voter, and this, in many cases, we're going to the day of the internet voting, I guess. And when we now listen to what was all the flack in the media after this last national election, all the election systems been hacked, all of this stuff, I think they finally realized it was somebody's, one or more people's email accounts about stuff that got hacked. But now we're going to talk about, is it possible, under all the different voting machines that you know about, including, of course, the one we have in Okaloosa County, is it even possible for somebody somewhere to get into those machines, into your main computer that's in the mainframe room, you might say, and actually make any changes with any of that data? Is it even possible to be done?
Well, so let's start the conversation with the question that you asked and half answered, which was, what do we know got hacked? So what we know got hacked, of course, as you already mentioned, were number one, the Democratic National Committee emails, which led to a lot of embarrassing things coming out, as well as several voter registration servers in a couple of states like Arizona and I want to say Illinois or Indiana, somebody up there. So several states' voter registration databases were accessed, and we know for sure the DNC emails. Now, does any of that correlate directly or even indirectly to voting systems? And that's why I want to draw that clear distinction, because what the news media reports is voting systems, which immediately tells everybody's mind goes to the actual voting process, when what was actually hacked were voter registration systems, not actual voting systems. So the other question we really don't have a good answer to is we're blaming the Russians, but is it a state-sponsored action, or is it actually actors in Russia who did it, who may or may not have been directed by the government to do it?
Well, as a radio station that just had one of our email accounts last week hit with one of those ransomwares, and when I looked at the header on it after Tommy had printed it, and I saw the .ru, I said, that email came out of Russia, somebody there. Now, who did it? We don't know. Luckily, it only got one machine, and we got it fixed within a matter of a couple of days, but oh, what a pain that was.
Well, and the county even had somebody who opened a ransomware email and clicked on the wrong link and locked up one of our PCs here. Thankfully, it wasn't one of the main lines that we use for our day-to-day business. It was one of the ancillary computers that was used during the election. And we're not even sure who was on it, or I can't say who was on it, but we're not sure which one of the temporary staff, and we had quite a revolving door of people at the busiest of times, is indirectly responsible for it being on there. But because it isn't an email server that any of us actually sit down and check our emails with. But when they're on a network, you've got to be very careful. So as soon as we realized what was going on, it got unplugged. We all shut down all of our PCs until we had it isolated. And the county had several other people who had done the same thing. So whether our PC was the one it came through, or whether that PC just happened to be one of the ones that got hit as the virus spread through the county networks, we don't know. But yeah, I mean, the Russians certainly, but you also have them from, you have actors in North Korea, you have actors in Vietnam, you have actors everywhere. China certainly is very, very much involved with it too. So, and again, how much of it is state sponsored? In some of those areas, more particularly the communist countries, we know it's state sponsored because our other intelligence sources tell us that. But whether the Russian government is really behind it, still a question to be answered. Although today's news stories were talking about possible sanctions against Russia for the hacking, before we've even really determined who's responsible for what. I'll leave that where it is. But now let's talk about what really concerns people. And as you can imagine, I got a lot of emails, I got a lot of phone calls about what are we doing to make sure our elections are secure. Okay. So I was an old military intelligence guy. I know that's an oxymoron, more particularly Army intelligence. So take that for what it's worth. So really, truly, anyone who's using even the very rudimentary operational security procedures for things, it's a really, really easy thing to keep secure. First and foremost, the software that we run must come directly from the state as certified software. So my vendor can't send me a patch to say install this on your server. The system itself is what we call air-gapped, so all of our sensitive systems are not plugged into the outside world until the absolute minute that we need them to be used that way. And even then, they're not really plugged in directly to the outside world. So our most sensitive system, where all of the results data is accumulated, that system never touches the outside world. There's a point when it talks to another PC that is talking to the outside world, but never while it's necessarily connected and talking to the outside. So all of our stuff comes in via modem from the precincts on election night, and that's the only time that the external server is even talking to anybody in the outside world. When all the precincts have reported, clip, unplug it, and it's no longer talking to the outside world. So we have an air gap for those sensitive systems to begin with, and the software that we're running must be certified by the state. And if there's a change to it, any change actually, and in fact I just got a CD the other day, comes in certified mail from the Division of Elections. Here's the software update your vendor has provided. They vet it, they review the source code, they go through all of that before they vet it and send it out to us. So first and foremost, the systems we use are air-gapped, and the software we use has to be certified by the same people who certified the election system for use in Florida.
I think when we did the historic video piece showing all your different machines and the new one, there is a modem, like it's a wireless thing on like a cell phone network or something, yep, that only gets turned on just in time to send, and then I'm just guessing now that when that signal is sent, each precinct has its own ID that's got to match up with data in what you've got receiving it here. And how long does it take typically for a precinct, the biggest precinct, for that data from that precinct to be sent from that modem in that counting machine at that precinct? Because
the data it's sending is simply numerical and very little text, it's a very, very short microburst of information, and it takes even our largest precinct maybe 10 to 15 seconds to report in before that signal is dropped and it's gone. And so, and again, like you said, each one of them is digitally signed and secured. So not only does the memory device that is holding the votes, that is transferring it to the system, have to have the right serial number to report in. My system will not recognize modems trying to dial in that are not on the app. I mean, we have the the ID list for every individual cellular modem in all of our machines, and all of those have to be loaded into our system or it simply will not talk to them. So even if you knew what number to, it's not really a phone number because it's more of a data transfer, but even if you knew what IP address to send a data packet to, if you're not calling from one of my modem ID numbers and you don't know what they are, heck, I don't even know what they are, Daryl does, but we don't publish that list. It's one of those things that we can protect from public records disclosure. Even with all of our public records laws in the state of Florida, we're allowed to protect certain things that help secure the elections, and that certainly is among them. So in addition to that, we always do the logic and accuracy tests, and I know you've seen a couple of those over the years. And that's just the test before we start tabulating any votes, whether they be absentees or before we send the machines with the memory cards out to the polling places, secured in their machines. We go through a test where we make sure that the logic of the programming of the election is correct, but we also make sure that it's accurately counting the ballots by hand marking decks that we do personally, sit there and fill in all the ovals. We know how many ovals we filled in what races, and when we run all the ballots through, it should produce the results that we expect to come out of them. And so that's all done. It thinks it's election day when we're doing it. So some people say, oh, but you know, all that pre-election testing stuff, it basically, you know, they can be Trojans and they sit there waiting for election day to activate. Doesn't work that way because when we're doing the test, it thinks it's election day. So we go through that logic and accuracy test for each and every election, no matter how big or small. That's always part and parcel of what we're doing. Then we have, of course, like you and I have talked about numerous times, all of our voters in Florida vote paper ballots, except for some very few counties that are still using touch screens only for voters with disabilities. Everybody votes by paper ballot, and in most of those jurisdictions, they use the same device we use, the AutoMark, which takes a normal paper ballot, provides a touch screen and audio ballot interface for voters with disabilities, and then regurgitates a marked paper ballot that goes in the tabulator the same as your ballot and mine. So everybody in my county certainly votes a paper ballot, so I always have the original record of the election, the ballots that the voters themselves filled out.
Well, I know that in one of the national far off to one direction or the other politically talk shows I happened to catch the day after the election, they were saying, well, there was a precinct in Detroit and they counted 135 votes and there only were 50 ballots in the box. Well, I don't see how that's possible for what you've shown me of these machines. Well, once that ballot goes in there and it's valid, it's gone, and then it can't be pulled out and put back in.
Well, and so that leads me to the third thing on my list, or however many we're up to, because I know I've doubled up on some of my numbers, which is post-tabulation reconciliation. And every county in Florida is required to do this. We take the actual paper tapes that are printed out from the machines in the polling place, and we verify them against the electronic totals that were reported to our machines to make sure that no funny business happened. Why? Because guess what? I can always zero those results out if something goofy happened, and I can run the paper ballots again because I still have the pieces of paper in my hand. So if any electronic reporting appears to be off by even the slightest margin, we can either go find why it's off. Maybe they miscounted how many ballots they thought they issued, etc. And it's usually almost always a mathematical error. They miscounted the number of unused ballots. But all of that stuff is reported to us on paper. So, I mean, there's no way to electronically hack that portion of what we do. And that post-tabulation reconciliation required in all 67 counties in Florida. Then, after the dust has settled and we've produced the official results, we still have the post-certification audit. And I know you've been here and seen the post-certification audit before, where we randomly select a couple of precincts, randomly select a race, and then we actually hand count those ballots to make sure that those ballots match the electronic totals that were reported. So we have steps pre-election that we take to secure the election. We have steps during the election that we take to secure it, and we have steps after it that we take to verify it.
So from what you have heard following the November election in all 67 Florida counties, I know we've not had any news stories hit any wire or newspapers. Were there any places where they discovered we had, quote, any kind of ballot corruption, any kind of problems, or were there any serious recounts done that you've heard about anywhere in the state?
Not in Florida. I mean, there's always a little bit of ballot fraud that goes on. I was reading a case this morning out of Miami where there was an not even an apartment building, it was a commercial address that apparently they had dozens of voters who were registered to this one suite number in this one building in a business area, not a residential area, and so they have launched an investigation, and they turned all of that information over to the state's attorney. Now here, of course, we're not Miami, so I've got a great team here, and we have our street index tables, and if you try to register to vote using a mailboxes, etc., or the RV mailroom on North Highway 90, we know where all of those places are. We know you're not giving us an actual residence address, so no, you're not going to be able to register 1,000 people at some fictitious address somewhere here. Certainly not in my county. Not to say that it can't happen in the larger jurisdictions, but eventually those things get noticed, and it's pretty easy to catch.
And of course, since Florida is one of quite a few states that you do have to have some other verification, and I think almost all states now match when a new person registers against whatever driver's license information they have. And I know if a person does not have a driver's license, at least in Florida, they can still get a picture ID, or they may have a military ID. Let's say they're a spouse of a foreigner, say young lady from another country who never got an American driver's license. I knew an example, but they had a military ID which matched up anyway against their voter registration data.
Well, that's right. And so to register, courtesy of the 2002 Help America Vote Act, that created a single statewide database for voter registration in each of the 50 states. The very databases that I talked about, they were hacked in some states, or that at least they know outside actors got into what they did. If they did anything other than look at the data or copy the data, they still haven't made that final determination. But courtesy of the 2002 Help America Vote Act, all 50 states now have a requirement to verify new registrations against driver's license data. And if they don't provide a driver's license or a state issued ID, like you said, if you don't have a driver's license, you're not allowed to drive anymore, but you have that Florida ID card issued by DMV that looks like a driver's license but isn't. Or the last four of your social, which does get matched against the Social Security Administration. So all 50 states are doing that. So you can't generate a bunch of fictitious registrations. Florida, because of changes to the third-party voter registration laws, keep very careful track of who is registering groups of people that when they bring them in batches, we know this batch came from this particular organization, so that if there's any funny business going on, we know what organization to go get our hands on. And so that's happening, statewide in Florida. When it comes to the actual act of voting, when people turn up to vote, Florida accepts 11 valid forms of photo identification. You mentioned the military ID, student IDs, passports, you name it. There's a whole plethora of things. Some states that have implemented voter ID laws, and they don't all have them, so each of the 50 states gets to write their own laws. But probably better than half of them have voter ID laws. There was a meme running around prior to the election that I had to debunk. One of my friends showed up on my Facebook feed, and it was one of those memes, and it said, President Obama won every state when he was elected that didn't have voter ID laws, and he lost in every state that had voter ID laws. And I said, patently false, because Florida's had voter ID laws since 1998, and Obama won Florida both times, and we still had voter ID laws in Florida. So you can put that rumor to rest anytime somebody tells you that that's how that worked out, because it isn't. But any of those 11 forms of photo identification, some states that have implemented them have been taken to court by the Department of Justice under the Obama administration, and most of them have lost. And those are states where they tried to be too restrictive on the types of IDs. So Georgia, when they implemented theirs, said only the Georgia driver's license and only the Georgia issued state ID, and those were the only two valid forms of ID to vote. Got into a lot of trouble and ended up losing in court. Texas, they said the same thing. They said Texas driver's license, Texas issued ID, or military ID, and that was it. And they went to court and they lost too. When Florida did theirs, we had 14 valid forms. It got whittled down to 9 over the years. They added 3 last year, so now we're back up to 11. Most people don't realize this, but in 2014, Alabama implemented voter ID laws. I know because I was driving my daughter back and forth, and I kept seeing the billboards advertising the new change to the law for everybody. Never heard about Alabama getting taken to court. Why? Because they took 9 valid forms of identification right out of the gate, including the most commonly used ones that just about everybody probably has one on the list. And their last one in Alabama, if you didn't have an ID, you could go to your local Supervisor of Elections office, and they outfitted all of them with the ability to print and make photo ID cards so that the elections office could verify you were you, check you out in the system, and if you didn't have an ID to vote, make an ID for you in Alabama. So that took all the arguments off the table up in Alabama. There was nothing to take them to court over. So if you implement voter ID laws correctly and smartly, you don't get yourselves in trouble with the Department of Justice.
Well, all in all, bottom line, folks, is voting in Florida, everything worked pretty good this year, and going to keep on doing it. And the system, to whatever we can tell about, we know that Okaloosa County was not hacked as far as getting into anything with the data for the voting or the voter registration database in this county.
That is correct. Absolutely. We're 100%. And again, you know, I always compliment, you know, the great team of folks that I have working here. I have other people who are military communications, who are in charge of some of this stuff, and they know what they're looking for. They know what to pay attention to, and we have our eyes on the ball at all times.
Paul, thank you for the time.
Absolutely.
And we'll be back on March 13th broadcasting election results.
That's, well, better be here on the 14th. If you're here on the 13th broadcasting them, I wonder what you're broadcasting.
Okay, the 14th of March is Election Day, folks. But you can register up through February 13th. That's the 13th. And then, of course, if you're not already registered, check out if you are a registered voter in your city. And it'd be nice if we can get more than 10% voter turnout in municipal elections. 10 to 15 is where we've averaged, except for Laurel Hill, who always, because it's a smaller number up there, and maybe Cinco Bayou sometimes gets a higher percentage. But we want to get all of you up there into the, it's the same for 25% voter turnout in our cities this year.
Well, you know, as I always tell people, the most important elections, you know, I get it. Everybody wants to vote for President of the United States, and that's where we always see the highest turnouts in the general elections and presidential years. But you know, the guy who really has his hand on your wallet is your local county commissioners, your local school board members, and your local city officials. If you're not helping decide who those people are, then you're missing out on an opportunity to have the most say in your government.
So if you're not registered, register. And if you are, vote if your city's having an election in March. And that's this edition of the Z-Files out here on the road.